If you look across the country, there are a lot of businesses like Timeless Foods that grew out of the farm as a vertical integration play to expand into the marketplace. They were lifestyle businesses run by families, yet very few of those places have a transition strategy. One, two, three.
Coming up, we're talking all things regenerative agriculture and how to develop new markets for regenerative farmers and their crops with Phil Taylor, the executive director and co-founder of Mad Agriculture. The Modern Acre podcast explores business, investing, technology, and sustainability in agriculture, and we're your hosts, Tyler and Tim Nuss. If you'd like to dig deeper with The Modern Acre, be sure to join our membership community, The Modern Acre Co-op. The Modern Acre is presented by Local Line. Start 2024 off right with Local Line. Local Line is the all-in-one sales platform for farms and food hubs of all sizes. Increase your sales and streamline your processes with features including e-commerce, inventory management, subscriptions, online payments, and more. Trusted by thousands of farmers in 7 countries, Local Line is the platform you need to take your farm to the next level. Subscriptions start as low as $49 per month. Try Local Line today and receive a free premium feature for 1 year and receive 15% off Local Line's marketing services using our coupon code ModernAcre. Tim, what's up? What's going on? You don't have your podcast set up right now. Low audio quality. I don't recognize the room you're in. I see snow in the background. What's going on, bro?
Ty, I feel like a venture capitalist just calling in from a podcast from Truckee, California, just getting on the slopes. But I got snowed in this weekend. I thought I was going to be back today so we could record the intro outro, but got 2 feet of snow yesterday, so still trying to get the house unburied.
Tim, it's like, vacation after vacation, you're quote unquote snowed in Truckee, no way to get home. It looks pretty cozy over there. I'm seeing is that a fireplace running? Have you read more on your, we're having our reading competition this year. Are you putting in some extra pages, some extra reading? It doesn't seem too bad over there being snowed in.
Ty, you got me. You were dead on. Yesterday I was reading a book, drinking some red wine by the fireplace, went through 90 pages. So I'm deep into book number 2 on our book competition right now.
Okay. Well, I'm close to finishing book number 2, but I think you're at a better pace given your handicap for the year. So, All right. Well, Tim, I'm going to lead us in here to this conversation with Phil. This was an awesome conversation. We've known Mad Agriculture for some time. They are really pioneers in the regenerative agriculture movement. And they originally started as a nonprofit to support and educate and train farmers. And they've really built different businesses on top of that original mission. We had Brandon from Mad Capital on the podcast last year. We'll link that in the show notes. And their latest venture is on Mad Markets. And that's actually buying up processing infrastructure to create markets for regenerative crops. And this is super interesting stuff, Tim. I think Phil and the team at Mad Ag just really are believers and evangelists of regenerative agriculture. But they are not just pioneers in that. I think they're pioneers in how to change the food system. And we talk a lot about the messy middle processing, and that's what they're focused on, and doing it in a unique way of, instead of starting something from scratch, acquiring and buying legacy processors to do this.
Yeah, it's super cool. We first became aware of this at RFSI last year when Phil was giving a pitch on what they were doing with Mad Markets. So it was really fun to get into the details of really the idea for it and how it's been getting it off the ground. So it's an awesome conversation. Let's jump in with what's top of mind for Phil.
I always have a really busy top of mind. There's never one thing, which has always been a challenge for me, to be wholly and fully present to one thing at a time and develop the focus that sometimes it takes to get things done. I love just the emergent turmoil of creation and when you're at that edge, everything's on your mind, but top of mind right now, two things. I go inner world, outer world. Inner world is, been really dedicated to some new meditation practices with a mentor of mine. Have been learning what feel like almost hidden and secret techniques of well-being and through breath work. And a lot of it recently has been showing up for me in really sort of mind training, mind control, learning how to expand the mind and then contract it with focus into certain areas. And that sounds very nebulous, but man, I've been feeling the benefits from almost like working out my brain, working the muscle of my brain, training it and keeping it well. And so I've been really been enriched through a very serious meditation practice in the morning. And, it's funny, like people say, I meditate 40 minutes every morning or whatever. I'm like, no way. And my meditation's now at like 35, 40 minutes and it feels too short. So that's been some really cool inner breakthroughs for me. That's top of mind in terms of like the grounding that is created in my spirit. And then other top of mind is more work and execution oriented, which is Mad Markets, which we'll probably get into, but we're the sort of final close of that, and the acquisition of Timeless Foods is on the horizon, March 15th. And man, that has been just a devastating amount of work to do. And, it's I've learned a ton. We're really going for it with curiosity and compassion and excellence. And I'm starting to feel just like the fruits on the tree starting to grow, just barely seeing them. So I don't know. That's what's top of mind.
Super cool stuff. Tyler and I saw your pitch at RFSI presenting Mad Markets, and we were both just super captivated and fascinated with it. So can't wait to dig into the details there. But before we jump in, Phil, maybe let's get a lay of the land on Mad Ag. You have Mad Agriculture, there's Mad Capital, Mad Markets. Maybe talk to us about how this all came about, kind of the origin story and what got you into ag.
Yeah. So I grew up in Maryland, really close to the Chesapeake Bay. Really close to the Susquehanna River. Grew up in a family that was just rad. I think at the core of what I learned growing up was this sort of mission of life, which is to discover your gifts and then learn how to use them in service to the earth and humanity. And so that sort of simple quest has been at the heart of that inner work and that outer practice that I love to live between. And so I grew up in a farming community, one stoplight town called Rising Sun. My grandfather was the only doctor within 30 miles. My dad's in medicine too. Very practical, hands-on service. Amazing women in my family, creators, artists, community leaders. And I grew up in a really awesome environment where I learned to sort of figure out how to channel that energy and put it to purpose. Initially, I thought that was going to be medicine. I then sort of listened to my heart and sort of careened off into being an ecologist for 15 years, which I loved. I was like an academic ecologist and worked at, CU Boulder and Duke, and took me all over the equator studying rainforests and loved that. But what happened was I ended up just sort of realizing that the academic way for me was over-serving the cerebral. I really wanted to have my fingers dirty and calluses on my hands again. And I wanted to be in the social and cultural thrum of really creating change. And as life has it, it tends to be circular. I grew up on a farm that we had rented to a neighbor, and boom, there it is, like agriculture, farming's right in my face. And going, wow, agriculture is it's the nexus point of planetary well-being and human well-being. How we choose to use the world is how we nourish ourselves. It's also how we nourish or destroy the natural ecosystems that, we're on. So anyway, that led me to agriculture. And then in this sort of dark night of the soul, between academia and the existential sort of questions of like, what in the world am I going to do with my life? 4 kids, wonderful wife, $0 in the bank account. How do you go from that place of sort of like, what's next, to muster the courage and creativity to carve something new that you feel like is resonant with what the world needs. It's resonant with what you need. And during that process of going, what's next, I returned back to kind of the family compound in Maryland and started, pulling Wendell Berry and Mary Oliver and Terry Tempest Williams and John Kabat-Zinn and a variety of just like sort of wisdom keepers, and stumbled back into the Mad Farmer poems of Wendell Berry. And the Mad Farmer poems are these crazy poems that Wendell Berry wrote in the late 70s that, they call humanity, to this radical reimagination of our economy, our relationship to people and place based on love, reciprocity, place-based wisdom, community values, and like this wonderful dose of radicalism. And, my friends, if you know me and you're a close friend, you know that I'd be standing on the barricade, fighting, not like in the halls of Congress. I'm a rebel. I like pushing edges. I like the edges. I like margins. I think that's where true change comes from. And so this kind of idea of the Mad Farmer, the ethos of that, embodied with this kind of servitude of how do we help farmers, thrive and transition to regenerative organic ag, was a perfect combo where, we could really let it cut loose, like art, science, poetry, spirituality, like let's bring it and not be scared about just being our full human selves in this kind of work. And so that's kind of the ethos of MAD. And then I can get into the granular, like, what do you do besides philosophize, get into all of that. But that's kind of that's the origin story in a nutshell.
You poked fun, but I mean, I think that's one thing from when I first heard about Mad Ag, like that ethos comes through, right? And like, it seems like everything comes from that, and that is laid out in how you communicate, what your brand is. Yep. That I think is really, really special, really unique. And you are able to hit that intersection, which I think is really hard for a lot of companies, a lot of businesses, a lot of nonprofits, whatever it is, to bring together a lot of different things and kind of wedge that line is hard. But, before we get into what Mad Ag does, tell me about that process for you into entrepreneurship, right? And doing your own thing. Like you grew up son of a doctor or in medicine, then you went to academia. Like, did you just have it in you to say, I'm going to go do my own thing? Like what in you made you decide to, hey, I'm going to go like build something new and kind of go a non-traditional path?
I think there's like, I can answer that in a couple ways, because I've asked that same question, like sort of what possesses me to do what I'm doing. I think there are hidden and powerful currents in my lineage around creators, entrepreneurs, artists, activators, people that love to put vision into practice. Like if I look back across my family, going back a couple generations, there are people like that. So I think there's an archetypal type thing that's probably coursing through my veins that I will never wholly understand. The other side that's more practical is that I'm the kind of person that if my inner world of desire, ambition is not perfectly or absolutely aligned with my outer expression, I really burn up. Like I get extremely dissatisfied. A cheap way of saying it is I like being my own boss. I think that cheapens actually what it is, but it is a way of kind of understanding it. Yeah, I think that the creative license that comes with entrepreneurial efforts is just, it's a quality of creation that I savor. I do. I just savor it. And so, yeah. And then the other thing is that it has to be backed up with a tremendous amount of grit. I'm the kind of person that is on all the time, to my detriment, honestly. Like I actually think that if adrenal fatigue is a thing, I have it, like I'm doing a lot of work on self-care and self-tending right now. As I was mentioning in the meditative practices earlier on, I'm really having to explore what it means to like wholly and fully inhabit my body on this earth. I tend to be very cerebrally driven. That's my engine. And so, doing things like self-care and taking time for myself, walking, slowing down, learning how to rest, like that feels very foreign and alien to me, and is often actually mixed with feelings of like guilt. Like, why am I sitting down on Christmas? I can't even like sit down and read a book. I'm like, If I'm not working, I'm playing music, or I'm in my wood shop, or I'm out working on my plow truck. If not that, I'm going over and seeing a farmer, whatever it is. So I have this kind of relentless tenacity that is part of my DNA that is both my strength and my shadow.
No, that definitely resonates with me. I feel like sometimes you just can't turn it off, where I'm just like, working all day. And then like when you get a little bit of free time, I'm turning on a podcast to try to like get more insights and distill something. So like actually like having the awareness to kind of like take a step back from that, I think is super good and something I'm working on personally. Well, Phil, let's jump into the business here and kind of outline what Mad Markets and Mad Ag and Mad Capital are all up to.
Yeah, so Mad Ag is a 501c3, and it was born technically, I think on November 19th, but we really had started kind of in 2018. But it was we received our kind of IRS determination letter then, and we started out as a company or a nonprofit that was dedicated to listening and discovering the needs of farmers and responding to those needs with a lot of verve and intellect and urgency. I mean, it's kind of what we did. We started by organizing these gatherings of farmers in the Front Range of Colorado into these old couple old grange halls that are sort of these dusty old buildings where farmers used to gather. And we kind of, brush the dust off, and we would have these big potlucks. And then I would facilitate these fairly intense, like co-creation ideation sessions around, what do farmers need in the Front Range to thrive? So we were covering everything from like, hoop house height regulations because of, whatever building permit codes, and sort of getting in the tissue of trying to, have farmers, work on hoop house sizes or more hoop houses, or maybe they could host like, not like 10 events a year, but 20 events a year, and they could have alcohol on their farms, like really simple, granular, like things that often stymie, farm creativity, from the production to the the agritourism side of things. And so we ran, I think, like 18 or 19 months of these Grange Hall meetings. And through that, somewhat unconsciously, somewhat consciously, what I learned we were doing is we were using empathy to understand the greatest needs that farmers have in terms of help. And then we were starting to build core services to address those needs and those barriers. And what we've learned, in the time since those Grange Hall meetings, which really wound down during COVID and haven't really rebooted, is that most farmers face 4 barriers. There's thousands of barriers, but they kind of fall into 4 main buckets. Bucket 1 is this mix of what feels like coaching, technical assistance, and thought partnership. Some people will simplify that into agronomy or conservation planning or holistic planned grazing, whatever. Like there's a lot of different dimensionality to that sphere, but it's really someone who can sit at the kitchen table, walk the land, and help the farmer or the rancher, the steward, cross the chasm between the idea to the action. How do you get from inspiration and vision to actually allocating resources, time, and labor to doing something different? And the activation energy on a farm to even sometimes plant a cover crop or adopt a new crop or buy a new piece of equipment that no one else in your community has, or host a field day about something radical that no one else in your community likes. These are really big things. I think the activation energy to transform our lives is very high. I'm sitting here on the podcast and I see that those set of weights behind you. Like that requires discipline, requires commitment. It requires a desire to be, a fit individual. Like, you can have all those desires, but to really push yourself just even as an individual to a new, who am I as a new person, as Tyler or Tim? Like that's hard. Now you take an entire family, you take a farm business, and you take an ecosystem that it's wound up with. Man, transformation is difficult. So the first thing, this is my long-winded way of saying that, like that thought partnership and that it really is kind of where we started. And it's what we do. It's the core of the nonprofit. In the process of doing all of that work and starting to develop projects from, cover crops to, reperennializing ag lands to developing holistic managed grazing systems to all those things, what we learned is that if the farmer does not have money, those ideas often never find the light of day. The idea never comes off the notebook on the bookshelf. You might have the vision scribbled out with your wife or your other stakeholders, your decision makers. But if you don't have money, it's very hard to activate. For better or worse, we can talk about money and currency and economy all day long. We probably won't. But the two ways that money comes into a farm are through where the farmer gets their financing, either their equity or their debt, or any kind of government support or whatever, or where they sell their goods, their crops, their livestock, their fiber. And so we quickly realized that in order to activate these things that we were working on, we needed to develop a capital solution and a market solution so that we could get money flowing into the farm to catalyze and sustain these commitments, these transformations. So over the last 3 years, we launched Mad Capital, which is essentially an alternative lender for farmers. We offer private credit, working capital, mortgages, equipment loans, infrastructure loans to farmers that are transitioning to or amplifying their regenerative and organic operation. And then on the Mad Market side, we have been connecting farmers to buyers and buyers to farmers the last 2 years. And now that is just spinning out as a for-profit. And that's taking a very different approach. What we're doing there is we're actually going about taking an infrastructure roll-up strategy, which we'll get into probably here in a minute, where we're buying physical assets that are the actual hourglass between farmers and buyers. Because you have these whole big communities of farmers, 70 farmers, 80 farmers. You have all these buyers. There's usually a couple pinch points right in the middle. Your cleaner, your processor, your distributor. Those hourglasses become these pinch points where everything goes through, and they become the critical points for everything from identity preservation to pricing, to like watching where margin goes, to creating unique sourcing and procurement programs, any direct trade strategies that you want to do. They all have to go through those places. And we know that missing, messy middle is a cluster right now. So that's where we're starting to really focus our time and energy. So that's kind of the spread.
No, I mean, I love, we've seen this before, right? This is not uncommon when you have a nonprofit that's working on a problem. Ultimately, it typically leads to for-profit solutions, right? To drive and align incentives and to build, for lack of a better word, markets for things. So, I mean, it makes a ton of sense. I want to dig in on Mad Markets. I think it's a super smart and cool approach. This is something we talk about on the podcast a ton, is just the messy middle processing, the supply chain that makes a transition to regenerative agriculture just tough and challenging, right? Because in many instances, like for in our instance, which I know you guys are focused on different crops, but our tomatoes, for example, we're selling to a processor. And there's no way today for the processor to differentiate our tomatoes from another farmer's tomatoes. And even if we grow them with cover crops, we reduce chemical use, whatever it is, there's no way for us to, see that, or a consumer ultimately to see that. And so this thought of how do we influence and enable that middle is makes a ton of sense to me. But I'm sure it's much harder in practice. So tell us a little bit more about the strategy there and how things are going with kind of your approach to acquire this processing layer.
Yeah, so we originally started out not wanting to actually acquire processors. We kind of beat our heads kind of hard against creating more of a digital platform for connecting the marketplace. If you look at in the modern world, the most powerful companies are like platform companies that are, leveraging latent value without owning any assets. Airbnb, homeowners and people that want to rent. They don't own anything. They connect them. Awesome. Uber, same thing, right? That's the vibe.
A venture capitalist dream.
Yes, exactly. And living in Boulder and being friends with a lot of venture capitalists, maybe they've rubbed off on me. And so it's actually interesting because it actually took me a little while to see the opportunity and to gain the confidence that we should do it, because it does run against the grain of what a lot of the industry sort of likes. You know what I mean? Like a lot of the impact investors, the venture, investors coming in the regen space, there's really no one working in sort of classic private equity project finance. I mean, no one's doing it. And so that's kind of why we're entering this space in many ways, because at the end of the day, like real food goes through facilities and, it's not like you can't create that in a digital marketplace. I mean, you got to actually have, grain bins and destoners and, cleaners and, aspirators. You have to have that stuff to actually feed the world. And so we sort of cautiously were like, man, I wonder if we could do this. And we work really closely with a really awesome community of farmers up in Montana that are also really tied in with a group called Timeless Foods. Timeless Foods is the subject of the Lentil Underground, a great book by Liz Carlisle, renegade farmers, in the Back to the Land movement, who basically create the organic ag revolution in Montana, using lentils and garbanzo beans as that critical nitrogen source, that pulse in the rotation. And then it spins off into this incredible company. And, the founders up there, Bud and David Owen, they're ready for retirement. They've been going at it for numerous decades. They've been leaders. They still work, tirelessly to the bone. And they're ready to be grandpas, and they're ready to pass the reins and let that legacy live on. And, there isn't that many private equity firms out there, if any, that would buy that without clear mission drift. And so a lot of these facilities, which are all over the country, basically, if you look across the country, there are a lot of businesses like Timeless Foods that grew out of the farm as a vertical integration play to expand it in the marketplace. They were lifestyle businesses run by families, yet very few of those places have a transition strategy. A lot of rural America has kind of evacuated to the cities. The sort of lack of core competencies there, hiring, staffing, becomes a problem. Alternative models sort of creating employee ownership pathways, aren't as mainstream enough to really, make those viable for many of these kinds of things without a lot of creative energy going into it. I mean, you just look at all the barriers. And so what Mad Markets is hoping to do is to very conscientiously buy these assets from these businesses, these family businesses, roll them up so that Mad Markets as a holdco can really focus on acquisition, transition, and basically operational excellence, getting digital CRMs and sales and doing all that work that a lot of these facilities need, while also creating a lot of sales channels, in CPG, in food service, in export, in institutional procurement. That all sits at the Topco, the management company, and then the assets live as subsidiaries. And, we're not going to come in, buy the asset and put Mad Markets all over the door. It'll be like, Timeless Foods is Timeless Foods, run by Mad Markets kind of thing. So we want to really honor the legacy, the employees of each of these companies that we're looking at. But, this is a long road that we're just getting started on. And we have yet to get our first acquisition done, which will happen later in Q1. But that's kind of where we're going and the opportunity that we see. And it gives us an enormous amount of capability by owning the asset to do some of the things I mentioned earlier, like identity preservation or creating identity, at least segregation for certain orders and lots to go into certain brands so they connected with certain farmers. A lot of this kind of scope 3 ESG space where people are trying to carbon count, biodiversity count, water quality count, down their supply sheds. None of that's possible right now with most intermediary processors. They don't provide any insight down their supply chain. Whereas in our approach, we're going to provide that transparency, drive that value back to the farm and the land, which we think is only going to create greater kind of embeddedness around, the transactions that we're going to be doing together, from farmer to buyer. So that's just a smattering of ideas that are sort of perfused through what's happening in Mad Markets.
That's awesome. I think it's such a big opportunity. Like, to your point, there's what they call, the silver tsunami of all these kind of boring businesses with aging owners where there's not a clear exit strategy. And these owners have built these businesses over their lifetimes, and they don't want to sell it to private equity and have it just stripped for parts and flipped in a couple of years. So you can come in and be a really compelling buyer where you have mission alignment, vision alignment of like how you are going to create additional value and like steward their business for the long term. So love the area that you're playing. Curious kind of like how the structuring and fundraising has gone. Like, it's a little bit of a unique model, like to your point, where it's not VC in ag tech play. It's not a farmland fund. It's a little bit non-traditional. So maybe just talk us through kind of like the initial stages of like how the capital raise is going to execute this.
Yeah, it has been just shy of hell. And I have to own a big chunk of that, which is that it's taken me a long time to understand the appropriate model and structural model and financial model to do this. Now what feels obvious, took me a long time to come to. It's like it takes a long time to get to simplicity. You look at like the Apple MacBook or something, right? You're like, whoa, simple, elegant, it works. I love this thing. Yeah, it took these guys, geniuses, to figure this out. So, we're getting to simplicity is hard. And it wasn't obvious when we were starting out that we needed to launch a Topco and an SPV for the subsidiaries immediately. So that's hard to do. It's hard to convince people that you are the right people to make an acquisition of a company if you've never done it before and you don't already have a Topco. I mean, you really have to bring investors up the learning curve with you, and they really have to trust you that you're the right team to get it done. And so, I believe 1,000% in my bones that we're the right team to get it done, but it does not solve the problem that we are inexperienced in just getting started. And so, the other thing is that's just practical. You're launching a Topco, the sort of return expectations and liquidity strategies of a Topco is very different than an SPV, right? And an SPV, a special purpose vehicle, which is, used to syndicate investment to buy the asset. So you have three entities, right? You've got your Topco at the top, you got your SPV where you're getting investors to come in, and then you're using that SPV then to purchase a majority or the whole share of common stock of these companies you're going after. So you got all these entities, and that's only one. So now what happens when you do two? And so, part of our strategy is to get like 2 good reps in over the next 2 years. We want to acquire one facility using an SPV model under the Topco. Timeless Foods is number 1. We have our eyes on 5 more that we're starting to diligence. And then those Timeless in this other facility would basically be warehouse investments that would get rolled up into a future fund. And so, a lot of the way that these things are structured are around typical kind of 80-20 terms, like you would find in an infrastructure fund with like an 8% hurdle. We can get into all those details and all the waterfalls, and that might sound like gibberish to listeners, but if you Google what I just said, a lot of stuff will pop up. So it's not gibberish, I guarantee you. And so, but it took me a long time just to realize like that language, right? Like speaking the language of private equity and debt and equity. And it's a lot to lift intellectually. And when you have a small trim team, basically, it's myself and Alex Heilman, who's the CEO of Mad Markets, trying to come up our own learning curve while also, learning with investors. That's been really challenging. Thankfully, in the world of financing, there's been amazing people out there. Some people I can't name yet because it's not, the paperwork isn't signed. A group, Terra Regen, they're leading. So Terra Regen's a new office out of LA, run by Tara Swibble and Calla Rose Ostrander. They, I've known Calla Rose for a long time, and her ability to get stuck in on complex projects and just work them to the bone, when she knows there's something there that's good, that's investable, to have an investor that's willing to get right in there and go hard with you, where you can be fully transparent, very vulnerable about what you know, what you kind of know, and what you don't know. Man, that just becomes key. It becomes key. And so Terra Regen is leading. We've got a ton of exciting people coming in, some big names, some small names, $25,000 checks, $1 million checks. And so right now we are right at the end. We have our close date is March 15th. We've got 85% of the capital committed with a lot of stuff soft circled. So the total raise between the two entities is 5.4 million. I'm getting really granular. I'm gonna get out of the weeds here in a second. But I think I guess maybe the benefit of saying all this is that I know a lot of people that are trying to build solutions that are slightly complicated, that are ambitious, and I think a lot of people struggle knowing how to move that vision into action. And it's taken me a long time to figure this out. And so I'm probably saying this out of kind of compassion, empathy, and intelligence. Like not only to say that it's possible, but to say that there are people like myself and others who are on the same journey and moving through the complexities of private equity and project finance and structures and hurdle rates, and it's all possible. And I'm really excited about where we are and what's ahead. So I'll leave it at that.
No, I appreciate you going into detail, and I'm sure our listeners do as well, of just understanding. I think it's in these types of deals, funds, startups, however you want to call it, I think there's just a tendency it just magically works. It just magically happens. And I think there needs to be more conversations around the challenges and how structures affect conversations and vice versa. And so I really appreciate you sharing more of that. Well, Phil, we're going to try to wrap this up here, and would love to get your perspective, just because your influence in the industry, what you guys have developed at Mad Ag, the different areas that you're touching in. What's your ag hot take?
My ag hot take is sort of an invitation for us to try to find like root cause below the languaging that often inflames and gets us nowhere. So like capitalism versus socialism or whatever, right? Like we just hear like capitalism's bad, socialism's bad. And we get lost into these big concepts, colonization or whatever, and it's like, I find that whenever that languaging dominates the conversation, I often feel like there are some layers that need to be peeled back. And so, when I think about private equity and ownership and all this stuff, like I would say 5 years ago, I wouldn't have touched this stuff with a stick, because I would have been a little too naive and immature. I would have labeled it something that felt scary, related to money or whatever. And I'm realizing that there's like actually plenty of virtue and tons of justice available in things that I have previously written off as, evil or malaligned. And so I think maybe my hot take is just stare at the thing that you like the least and lean into it until it begins to soften, and you begin to be surprised by how much you like it.
Love it. Phil, this has been a ton of fun. I feel like we can go on for another hour, but we know we're pressed on time. We're gonna need to do a part 2, maybe early next year, and see how things are going with Timeless and how the rollout is going. So as we wrap up here, how can listeners get in touch and connect with you and everything you're doing at Mad Markets?
Yeah, my email is simple. I'll say it out loud. Philip with 1L at madagriculture.org. If I don't respond to you, I will forward you to who you need to talk to in the organization. But love hearing from people. I'm very diligent about connecting with people. I feel like social capital, which is one way of saying it, but building community is probably one of the most important things we could possibly be doing. And so, if you're curious, you can get in touch. You want to swap lessons learned. You want to learn from battle scars, and you want to commiserate or celebrate. I'm wide open to it.
So, Ty, what do you think of that conversation with Phil?
I think Phil is a really unique thinker, and it was just great to digest and listen in on every, how he thinks about things. And I think doing something like Mad Markets is totally hard. And I think he was very transparent about how hard it is and raising capital, acquiring a legacy business. And I thought it was just really enlightening. I think there's a lot of opportunity in this space, but it is not easy. Whether it's at the target business to buy, investors, financing, it's all really complicated to how to make it work, and also make it work when you're working with these, their network of growers that are trying to sell their crops into this processing. So really, really interesting stuff. My wheels were turning throughout the conversation, and we'll have to have Phil back on really to see how things are going once they, post acquisition, and how they're integrating and building on top of this initial acquisition. We'll be following that closely. So guys, thanks for tuning in. Tim, it's rough out there in Truckee. Stay safe, put an extra log on the fire, maybe light a candle, whatever you need to do to just stay comfortable. I know it's just really hard times for you.
It's a really tough time. I'm going to go try to find a hot tub, so I'll talk to you later.
All right, guys. We'll talk to you later this week.